This is a data privacy detective. Well, July of 2024, a lot has happened in the data privacy space. We're going to jump right into it. With me every month are Brion St and Yugo Nagashima. Brion, you're senior counsel at Wabash Marketplace. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And Yugo, you are an intellectual property and data privacy attorney with Frost Brown Todd. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm going to go first this time. The detective will go first. The U.S. Department of Commerce on July 26, 2024, announced guidance and software to improve the safety, security, and trustworthiness of AI systems. Now, don't tune out. This is more exciting than it sounds. And let me give you a little bit of what's at stake here. These are examples that Vice President Harris gave at the Global AI Safety Summit that occurred in 2023. When a senior is kicked off his healthcare plan because of a faulty AI algorithm, isn't that existential for that person? When a woman's threatened by an abusive partner with explicit deepfake photographs, well, that's pretty terrible. When a young father is wrongfully imprisoned because of biased AI facial recognition, how about that? And when people around the world cannot tell fact from fiction because of a flood of AI-enabled myths or disinformation, what does that do to all of us? So these are the risks that are at stake here. And now we have new guidance and even software from the U.S. government dealing with AI safety. Now, just a few highlights. This is very much worth reading if you're involved in this space. NIST, that's the National Institute of Standards and Technology, it's part of the Department of Commerce, has now pushed out 3 final guidance documents, plus guidance from the U.S. AI Safety Institute. Yes, that's part of Commerce also, all intended to help mitigate the risks of AI. And NIST has listed 12 specific risks and 200 actions that developers can take to manage them. Well, this is going to become best practice stuff for developers in the tech space. There are different standards, lower ones for just cyber attacks, that's bad enough. Higher standards for the production of mis- and disinformation or hate speech and other harmful conduct. And generative AI systems are going to face real standards here when they confabulate or hallucinate content. All of this is covered by this guidance. Very interesting stuff. NIST has also released a software package, and that's designed to measure how attacks, mail attacks, can degrade the performance of AI systems. It's one of the vulnerabilities, and that's to help small and mid-sized businesses evaluate developer claims about how AI performs. It's not always going to be perfect, and it's not risk-free. And it's going to help the U.S. government understand what happens when attacks can make AI perform less effectively or even fail. And 2 of these sets of guidance have been released publicly for the first time just a week ago. We're releasing this on August 1, 2024. One is guidance from the U.S. AI Safety Institute that will help AI developers evaluate and mitigate risks that I've talked about. And this idea of dual use for generative AI. Now, this isn't dual use in the international trade space where civilian and military can both use certain things for their purposes. No, it's a recognition that AI tools can be used for good and bad purposes, dual uses. And the idea is to figure out the risks that are at stake here and to try to eliminate them as part of the standardization of AI and the regulation of AI. Now, one other point, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, also part of Commerce, has issued guidance update on patentability subject matter eligibility. Now, this is quite interesting because it kind of singles out AI as maybe having different standards for what you can and can't patent. We're going to have to look into that. Well, is this a bipartisan matter, or is it one of these things that tears our society apart in the United States. Well, the truth is, this really builds on a 2019 NIST plan that came from the Trump administration. And here you have the Biden administration building on that. Both, of course, want the U.S. to lead in setting AI standards and regulations, something not easily accomplished. But when you look at that 2019 plan, this is really a growth from that, not a deviation from it. And what you see is an emphasis that continues to be on the private sector, that these standards should be set through voluntary development by the vast array of industry and commerce, not just imposed too early by government. You see that throughout here. And finally, an observation or two about this idea that the U.S. can lead how AI develops. Well, we're a private sector oriented country. Some other countries are not. They're totalitarian, or for their own reason, government imposes law and order to an extreme we would not find comfortable in the United States. And yet data flows globally. It's interesting in the White House summary of what Commerce just released to learn the following things. There already exists a global network of AI safety institutes that are already talking about these standards and how to make them applicable around the world. The United Nations General Assembly has adopted unanimously, how about that, a resolution with more than 100 co-sponsors from a wide variety of countries, laying out a common vision for how AI can be safe and secure across the globe, despite governmental differences. And 55 nations have now endorsed a political declaration on the responsible military use of AI. Well, that's quite remarkable. So we see the understanding that data protection, AI protection, and safety is a global matter, whether you're China or the United States or Europe or the country of Venezuela. There is so much at stake here. And let me turn to you, Yugo, for briefly about patents, patent eligibility. Does this have some importance here? What are we talking about?
It does. So patent eligibility is one of the biggest issues in patent prosecution, or people who are trying to get patents. And of course, AI, with generative AI and being able to come up with a new invention, there's already some guidance from the USPTO about how much can a inventor rely on AI, generative AI, to do the research, or to do the bulk of the work, or some of the work, on how to create a new improvement or a new invention. And eligibility, again, goes into the area of who's really the inventor, who invented something. So far, we have some guidance already from the USPTO side, which is there must be, first of all, AI cannot be the inventor, number one. Number two, there must be a substantial contribution. So I guess we'll get further guidance on that point about substantial contribution in the future.
Yeah, we can't say that a machine is the inventor. We don't have the address for the machine. Good point. We'll come back to it. Well, let's jump to you, Brion. Now, I drive an automobile, and maybe I didn't know until I've gotten into this data privacy stuff that it's spying on me, that it's looking at me, it's recording. Am I speeding? I mean, it's doing all sorts of things here. And, how are we seeing the Federal Trade Commission get into this? And how are a couple of senators beginning to urge the FTC to do certain things? What's happening?
Yeah, and so, Joe, the Senators Wyden and Markey just recently sent a letter to the FTC regarding, really their concern around privacy in the auto industry. And, and kind of what you're seeing is these cars have had such a rapid improvement of technology, and they're really calculating and tracking all sorts of information. And so these systems capture a wide range of data, from location, driving habits, and even some of them look at biometric information. And the concern really is this data can be misused or accessed without the driver's consent, which leads to significant privacy considerations.
Yeah. Well, it sure does. I mean, you can see the good side of this. If our car says, "Are you falling asleep on your 8 hour?" That can be helpful, and certainly car makers want to make their cars safer. You can see the benefits, but talk more about these privacy issues and why are they coming up now?
Yeah, and so originally, and we all know driving these vehicles that the focus was on convenience and safety features. But as you've seen the scope of the data collection increase, it became clearer and clearer to privacy advocates and lawmakers that there was really a potential for misuse here. And so there were a number of high-profile cases and reports of unauthorized data access, and really the sharing have kind of brought this issue into the spotlight over the last year.
Yeah, well, that's a different shift in focus. So tell us more about this recent letter from the two senators.
Yeah, so the letter from Senator Wyden and Markey emphasized the need for stronger regulatory oversight to protect consumer privacy in the context of this collection. And so they really urged the FTC to establish clear guidelines and to enforce strict measures to ensure that consumers are fully informed about what data is being collected, how it's being used, and who it's being shared with. And really the motivation behind this push is to safeguard the personal information and prevent the potential abuses.
Of course, but two senators are not the Congress. So, I mean, how does this impact car manufacturers and technology providers in the auto sector?
Yeah, and so assuming it's, some enforcement is adopted by the FTC, this would require car manufacturers and tech providers to adopt more transparent practices. So they would need to implement robust consent mechanisms to ensure the consumers are aware and agree to the data collection processes. Additionally, they would have to establish strict data protection protocols to prevent unauthorized access and sharing of this sensitive information.
Well, I can understand that. I mean, is the auto sector making a fortune selling our personal data without our knowledge?
Well, this is actually probably the most interesting part of the letter. And so there were three lawmakers referenced in the letter: Honda, Hyundai, and GM. And for Honda, they indicated that they shared data with 97,000 cars to Verisk and were paid about 26 cents per car.
Well, that's not a whole lot. Yeah.
Not at all. And Hyundai didn't fare much better. They shared data with 1.7 million vehicles and were paid about 61 cents per car. GM did decline to comment, but I would imagine you're somewhere in that ballpark. So it really raises the question of a few thousand, low dollars compared to the billions of dollars generated from the actual sale of the car, and whether or not that really makes sense, as we kind of go through this.
Doesn't sound like it's driven by a profit motive for the auto sector, but every dollar counts maybe. Well, what about the scale of people affected?
Yeah, so you've got 280 million vehicles on the road in the U.S. alone. And a significant portion of newer models are equipped with all these advanced data collection systems. So this means potentially hundreds of millions of drivers could have their data collected, often without their explicit knowledge or consent.
Well, what about, this call for enforcement actions? What do you see in that?
Yeah, so the call was really for a proactive stance. And so this would include conducting regular audits, imposing fines for noncompliance, and taking legal action against entities that violate privacy standards. The goal is to create, a deterrent effect, kind of encouraging companies to prioritize consumer privacy.
And of course, we've seen some private actions where somebody's insurance rates went up because of some data that was shared, and this person didn't know it. But they're asking the FTC to step up itself. And it's kind of a balance, isn't it, between protecting consumer privacy and yet, improving and fostering innovation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always the balance as these technologies kind of push each other, both in terms of the data privacy protections as well as the safety and security, or even, the insurance companies, which is where that data for Verisk is going, is to drive overall premium, outcomes and prediction. So, the next steps really are for the FTC to, fully review the letter as they would with any letter from a lawmaker. And if they decide to act, they would have to go do so through, rulemaking process, unless they felt they could utilize some of their other enforcement mechanisms in this place. So I think what you're going to see is really just a general push towards more kind of both transparency and a push to adopting more terms and conditions and acceptance by drivers.
Well, in the interim, while this is unfolding, what should we as drivers, consumers, and businesses, what should they do to stay informed and compliant from a business standpoint and protected from a personal standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I would say take a look at what your data policies of the vehicles that you drive and really consider their opt-out rights where appropriate. Some of them are relatively easy to implement. Others are more difficult. And that's kind of a balancing act. Businesses, on the other hand, should really begin looking at data collection and privacy practices to ensure they're aligning with any potential new regulations or, the actions from the FTC in this case, because the auto industry may be first here, but there's going to be other pushes to other similar situated industries.
Well, Brion, thanks for updating us on that, and we'll see what the FTC does. And let's stay with the FTC and turn to you, Yugo. Boy, the FTC's in full gear here. Maybe it's becoming our privacy federal agency. I don't know. But it's protecting and understanding and dealing with privacy more than ever. What else has the FTC been up to in July?
Thanks, Joe. The FTC has been busy, you're right. Not just the auto privacy side, but also about this new but age-old concept of surveillance pricing. And surveillance pricing investigations have been going on across the industry.
Surveillance pricing. Boy, I better read my Orwell some more. Well, what is surveillance pricing?
So as we know, with the development or with everyone adopting, I should say, the artificial intelligence technology, the FTC is really concerned about using AI to adjust prices by collecting personal data and customer behavior, which basically leads to different prices depending on which customer is buying a certain product. And I want to give a little more color on that. If
give us more color.
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
So, let's say that I am traveling to San Francisco. And I want to use this example because it's, San Francisco is where a lot of things happen. And that's where Lena Khan announced this surveillance pricing investigation or study. If I bought a plane ticket and then I also booked a hotel, and if that information was already taken by, let's say I just booked the flight, right? And I have a rental car service, right? And I haven't booked the hotel yet, but the hotels gets the information somehow through artificial intelligence that I'm traveling to San Francisco for at least 3 days. I need a hotel. There's more likely a reason for me to pay a higher price because I have no choice but to stay at a hotel, right? So the information, the personal data about me having flights and having a rental car would likely bump up the price of a hotel that I'm going to stay. On the other hand, I didn't have tickets to travel to San Francisco and I'm just looking at hotels. My price might be cheaper because I might just be considering a destination. Not that I'm definitely already locked into going to that city, right? So the price may be different and cheaper. That's what surveillance pricing is.
And all this may be going on without our even thinking about it or assuming anybody's got our information. Well, is there a specific industry being investigated?
There really isn't. It's across the industry. What we're seeing is there's 8 companies that were named, and I don't want to name the companies. I want to just be very high level here. But there's consulting firms, banks, fast food chains, large retailers, grocers, coffee shops, big one, and also even online service providers. And also what seems to be the big target or the area that they're looking into is the third-party intermediaries who is most likely using the AI to calculate the price.
Well, what do you think the FTC's aim is here with the investigation it's doing?
So first, I want to talk what FTC is investigating, right? So what they're looking at is the concern really is the customer's privacy, consumer protection, and competition, right? Because if one company can use all the big data and get the price while others, there's an edge. So the aim here is, and according to news sources, FTC aims to improve its understanding. So there's actually a study going on. They're not actually going to start an enforcement action, but they're trying to study to understand how services are being provided with these AI technology, AI providers, and how the AI providers use algorithms along with the personal information such as location, demographics, credit history, browsing history, and shopping history to come up with a target price for a certain product or service.
And I guess right now we're not sure what the FTC will do. As you say, they're investigating, but what are your thoughts?
Right. So we don't know what the FTC is going to do with that information. All we know is that it's a study. But what we do expect, because it's a study, eventually once they fully understand the practice of surveillance pricing, we can anticipate that there'll be regulatory action by the FTC. And possibly this information, this study will be shared with other agencies that cover consumer protection, like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, to take regulatory action. And I think that's what we should be expecting for businesses.
Very interesting. Well, Brion, I mean, we have a Supreme Court that is kind of dim right now on the allowing agencies just to go out and regulate things that aren't very clear from what Congress asked them to do. We have a kind of different take on all that. What do you see here? I mean, is it enough to wait for the FTC or the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau to adopt some rule, or what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think what you're really seeing is legislators need to step up. I think the lack of comprehensive privacy legislation in the United States is just continuing to make this more and more challenging. And I think here you're getting the sense from the letters to the agencies, and then now you have the Supreme Court pushing down on the agencies. So really the only solution in my mind is to kind of start that process towards comprehensive privacy legislation, which I think is really the right way to manage these level of issues.
Yeah, and this is an example of where surveillance pricing, which in part has to do with just kind of antitrust and fair trade issues, just intersects with data privacy and what information about us is available to people, even without our knowledge. Well, as always, go ahead, Yugo.
And I want to add, it's a national issue, like Brion noted. It can't be that a patchwork of agencies in different states does their small little component. And here, the FTC is moving a federal agency. So there needs to be some authority under the law to let agencies take action. And as Brion said, we need to have these standard laws that everyone can follow, so everyone knows what to follow.
Well, after we get through the election, let's see if Congress can get its act together. We will find out soon. As always, I'll remind us all that thank you, Brion and Yugo, for your updates. Protecting your personal privacy begins with you.